And we can start the video whenever.
I'm starting recording immediately. It's happening this instant.
Perfect.
That sums up how it has been so far to be publishing. How are you feeling? I think my nose might be slightly bleeding, so if we have to deal with that, that's gonna happen later.
I have that lovely problem where my nose decides to like pour rivers of blood whenever it chooses to. I have no choice over it. It just happens.
I think that means we're secretly vampires somehow. We're like long descendants of
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Let's unpack that a little bit more. What is so like draining about the publishing process?
I'm done, essentially, right? Now I'm just waiting. Now it's trying to figure out, all right, how much longer is this going to take to get out? 2 weeks for me. And every day it's just this like mental stress of like, what did I screw up? Like what's going to go wrong on release day? And I'm terrified of that. And so it's just kind of this like additional layer of anxiety just put over my brain and you have to just sit in it and be like, everything's okay. You triple check everything the 5,000th time. And then you tell yourself you didn't make a mistake, even though there's 6,000 steps and you probably did.
Are there any specific things that you're worried won't like work out?
Self-publishing, even though I went through and got all the editors and stuff, I'm still afraid that there's going to be slight grammatical errors, and I've had to just let that go. There's just the imposter syndrome as well, of like, there's not anything specific, but I'm just afraid like someone's going to knock on my door and then be like, you can't do this, and then just be like, we're putting handcuffs on you, buddy. You violated the law of being an adult, and then they drag me out back and shoot me. Like, there's just like that general fear that I've had my whole life. Like, that's been a very real fear in my life, that like they'll just show up one day and be like, no, you've done this all wrong. We're putting you back in school.
So it sounds like your fear is that like despite all the research that you've done and despite all the work that you've done, you'll still have done it incorrectly in the eyes of other people.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Or like to some extent I've just like foundationally done it wrong in some systematic society way that I just haven't realized. Because, I very much so believe we all live in chaos, right? Like the world is just people all trying to figure it out. So I try to remind myself of that, and I'm like, you did everything right. It's okay. You're going to be fine. But at the same time, there's just that anxiety where it's like, no, you didn't. You're the dumb one that everyone's laughing at secretly. So it's just, everyone feels that, I feel like.
Well, I think I can speak for a majority of people when I say that I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of us really appreciate your that willpower and that like self-confidence to put yourself out there in the way that you have, because you wrote that story like what, in under a year between like starting it and like probably less than 6 months.
So the full timeline of that is a bit tricky, because it's like, okay, it's been percolating in my mind for a lot longer, right? There's been ideas that I've been building to put in there for a while. Part of the reason I am being so transparent with the authorial process and I want to be so involved is I want to give people like something to look to. So if I make mistakes, look to my mistakes and realize you shouldn't do that. If I do stuff right, great, follow in that. I just think it's going to be a helpful tool to anyone who wants to self-publish. Not that I'm going to do it well, but that I'll at least be able to show you how it could be done or how you can make these mistakes. And I think that's important.
Not something that many people have done, to be honest, where they use their platform and they show everyone every step of the way.
I love her content. She went traditionally published. So I think she did put out a video that I think is a great resource for trying to go traditionally published route. But I'm going the self way. So it's just kind of like those two different roadmaps. And I think my recent self-publishing video was kind of inspired by her, because I went, hey, that was a great map she put down of a way to get traditionally published. And it also really proved a lot of people wrong who thought, hey, if you have an audience, you can get traditionally published super easily. No, you can't. Like, she showed it's still a struggle. And her book was decent. Yeah. So like it's not a matter of quality. It's just a matter of there's still a lot of gatekeepers in the world that have just kind of been set up there through the institutions of publishing. And so I wanted to provide a similar route that I think more often people will be looking for now, which is self-publishing. And one of the real things I wanted to hit on in that video that's so important is if you're going to self-publish, you got to edit. You got to get proper editors, get people you trust to look at it, and pay your artists. Like, I know that's like, it seems obvious, but I've talked to a lot of artists who had to deal with people who tried to gyp them out, tried to not pay them fully, and that's almost like embarrassing in my opinion to like, I don't want that to be a reputation of self-published authors. I don't think it is in general, but like the fact that those people are out there, it's just like, I'm sorry they exist. I'm going to tip you more now. Like, it's just like, I'm sorry you had to experience that.
Well, and it's a tough world, I think, for artists because we're taught we have to like capitalize on everything we do, and their main skill is art. And if you're not capitalizing on that, you're doing something for free, which means like it's not worth as much. So in a societal way, it's kind of unideal. And I don't know, I feel like people should respect artists personally because that's their livelihood. That's how they're making money, and to not pay them is just
it's
ridiculous.
Disrespectful, it's dishonest, it's theft in my opinion, and also like they are worth the money you're paying them because they have a talent that's awesome that you do not have. Like you looked them up in the first place and you fell in love with their work because most likely they are an extremely talented individual.
Speaking of, how did you find Felix?
I reached out to Evan Winter and Nicholas Ames, both of whom have absolutely brilliant covers, and they gave me a couple recommendations each of artists to look into. And I looked into everybody, and I had two people I kind of narrowed it down to, and Felix was the one who had just amazing art and a price that was within the budget I set for myself. And I'm so happy I chose him because Felix Ortiz, one, if you've seen his artwork, it's
amazing. I went through his profile.
Yeah,
it's
his work with
art.
color, especially, I just find to be jaw-dropping. And then he was so pleasant to work with, really nice guy, and he's definitely a talent. If anyone's looking for cover artists, can't recommend him enough.
So you keep bringing, you've brought up the idea of imposter syndrome, I think, in like every interview and in a lot of conversations recently. And working with an artist like that, I would imagine that the feeling kind of comes in. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that was like?
So that was the one where I found to be most important to overcome it. Because just speaking to artist friends I have, they always say people who are unsure when they're talking to an artist are the most frustrating clients. So just on a professional level, I just made myself be like, no, be specific, be confident, and that's what artists look for. They want someone who's going to tell them, here's what I want, here's what I'm looking for, here's a couple pieces that are like inspiring it. Because it's really actually slower as an artist to work with someone who's just like, oh yeah, do whatever you want. Because then they're like, hey, I need to know your vision for this. It's your project. Like they're just trying to act as a medium for you. And so that one, the imposter syndrome, I got over the fastest because it was, one, he was just stupendous to communicate with. And he clearly has experience working with people who, he was very quick with the questions. But also, I didn't give myself any leash for my own anxiety to slow myself down there because it's his time, and I don't want to waste his time. It's more valuable than mine. So that was a big one. But imposter syndrome, I mean, it's been a running discussion around my book because I feel like it's something in all walks of life people are dealing with, whether you're, working a job in a corporate world or you're trying to get into a new hobby. Everyone kind of feels like they don't belong at first. It's really, really common. And, I still feel it with my regular job of being a YouTuber. I mean, every time I put out a video, there's this, why would you care? Like, why would anyone care?
I relate to it. I know that feeling very well.
And so it's something I want to, be transparent with, as I have been with everything mental health in my channel. I think it's really, really, and here's how bad my anxiety is. Me being honest about my anxiety makes me feel like an imposter of like speaking about anxiety, even though I've been dealing with it my whole life and have had ups and downs with it. It's so bad. My brain is like, nah, you shouldn't be talking about that. That's not cool. I'm like, let me at least talk about it.
Where do you think that stems from, do you think?
I think it just stems from, one, like we live in a world, I almost just said we live in a society. Culturally, there's a lot of criticism of one another and, not a lot of understanding of where people can be coming from and, not a lot of forgiveness of smaller mistakes. And we live in a world where you get more likes for calling someone out than providing insight of here's where they were probably coming from with that. And so I think that kind of breeds some of that. But also I think it's just kind of evolutionarily bred into us. I mean, the cautious animal out in the plain trying to survive is more likely to not get eaten than the one that just walks on out there. I think, confidence is great. There's people who've certainly overcome it. But, I just think we are not living in our natural state as creatures, right? Like we evolved to be hunter-gatherers, and now we're YouTubers, lawyers, doctors, and stuff like that. It's not exactly natural for us, and that's why I think we're seeing more and more psychological diagnoses for, being in the world we're in. I mean, we're so overstimulated, we're so overconnected, but that's also a good thing because we are pack animals. It's so good that we're finally recognizing all this stuff and diagnosing it and treating each other with more respect. I just want to see that medical side of things bleed more into the social, because I feel like a lot of people do lip service for, I'm pro, understanding anxiety and depression, but when it comes down to like how we interact with each other, we still have this like mentality, and it's like, hey, can we all take a hit, relax, kumbaya, we're not that evil, no one's that good, we're all just existing.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of conversations that I've been involved in recently revolving around this. I think not to like let politics slip into here, but like cancel culture is like a symptom of exactly what you're talking about. And cancel culture might be potentially why a lot of us feel imposter syndrome, because we know that because we're not necessarily experts, and even if we were experts, someone could still call us out and say, you don't know what you're talking about because X, Y, and Z reason. It sounds to me with your imposter syndrome that you're pretty good at cutting it off when other people are involved, and you're trying to make sure that you're doing what's right for the other person, not wasting their time. But it seems like for your own self, that's where most of your imposter syndrome comes from. Is that an accurate analysis?
Yeah, pretty much. With cancel culture, I'm not as worried about it, because I don't think I'm ever doing anything that's offensive enough that people are going to be like, boycott him forever, and I believe people should be held accountable for their actions if they're bad enough. So like that side of, like, if someone's caught doing something awful, that's fine. But for me, I don't feel that much fear there. For me, the fear more comes from almost like a respect angle. Like, I want people to understand, like, I don't want to be viewed as like some Anthony Fantano level music reviewer who has like the best insights and all this. I'm just having fun. I want my little corner of YouTube to be everyone having fun and just talking about the genre we enjoy. And I don't think my opinion's better than anybody else's. But now that I've stepped my foot into the author space, it feels like the tone changed. It's like there's been a song going on and suddenly someone hit a key that's just like over there, and you're like, what was that? Because like it brings in a level of seriousness I didn't anticipate, where suddenly people are going like, if his book's not good, that means his reviews are bad. And I'm like, what? Those are two entirely different beasts. And it's very scary, but if I don't do it, I'll regret it forever, so I have to do it.
Well, and I think that it's creating a sort of shift in what people are perceiving as the line between author and reader, because I think most people who read want to write stories. Like, I feel like it's a pretty consistent thing that I meet with people who read a lot. It's because they also want to write, or they write because they've read so much and now they've had like the spark of an idea of a story. And yet there also seems to be this really big conversation that's sparked kind of from you publishing and being involved in your reviews, which is that there should be separation between author and reviewer. I'm wondering, like, what's your thoughts on that? Because obviously you're kind of doing a little bit of the opposite.
No, I've said on my channel for quite some time, I've wanted and advocated authors getting involved in the conversations. I interview them, I talk with them, I want their opinions on reviews. And I never want to, anyone to feel like I'm stepping on their toes. I mean, I responded to a review, and before I did that, I reached out to the guy who wrote it, Travis, and was like, hey, is it okay if I publicly respond? He said, yeah, absolutely. So, it was a very, okay, I just want to make sure we're cool with that. So I think, yeah, it's necessary to take that step if you're going to have some kind of, here's my thoughts on your thoughts. But, authors have been in my comment sections for a long time. I think it's good. I think it's nice to understand what an author's intent is and when you want to have that. But I also 1,000% encourage people, if you don't want to hear what I have to say, please ignore me. I'm very okay with being ignored. It's fine to just say, the author's talking, good, he can shut up and be over there. That's not going to offend me. I just have always been a very big advocate, from my background in debate to rhetoric to fully getting all sides, talking it out. And that's the beautiful thing about the internet, right? If you want to have that conversation, great. But if you don't, you can just close a tab and be like, great, I'm going to be over here.
Yep.
So I understand, people not wanting authors to do that. It's just my philosophy is I do want to speak to an author and know what their intent is, what they think of certain criticisms. I wouldn't like Malazan as much if I hadn't talked with Erickson about his intent writing it and his handling of characters. I mean, that conversation was very eye-opening to me, and it made me appreciate his writing on another level. Not that I think I'm anywhere close to freaking Erickson, but it's just... I always will value more information, no matter what. And if, and I'm not saying that's right. It's absolutely okay to say, no, I want a space where there's no authors. Awesome. Tell me that. I'll stay away from that space. But I also want to be able to, on my own platform, have whatever talks people want to have. If someone puts out a blistering review of my book, it's fantastic. I actually want to talk with that person, privately or publicly, whichever they prefer. That's fine. It's curious. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it. It's just a matter of what you want, and you can control what conversations you're in, and that's good.
Personally, I'm of the opinion that I appreciate authors being more involved, and as someone who actually started watching your channel so that I could understand my audience, like I started watching your channel because you were the sort of demographic I'm shooting for, like younger male who likes darker stories. Like that's just with big worlds, like that's like my ideal audience. So that's why I started watching you. And actually by doing that, I've been able to read more books and figure out my taste better and how I want to portray my own stories. And I also think that a major element of successful feedback for a writer is to be clear what your intent was to your reader, and then they can tell you, did you get your intent across as you meant to? And then you can actually see what was successful about what you wrote and what wasn't, and make adjustments. Whereas without that element, sometimes it's a little harder to do that because you don't know then if somebody is misinterpreting what you said because they have an extreme bias against that topic, or if because of the way you actually portrayed it, did actually do what they're saying made it feel offensive.
Well, there's a whole other angle to this that I think is equally worth talking about, and that is authors who will explicitly say, I do not want you to know what my intent was. I do not want that part of my art out there. I want it to be something that is speculated on. And that's a whole other, approach to crafting a story with themes and everything, and I totally appreciate that. I could see trying to write a story like that in the future that is more, there's like basically the extremes, right? You have like Tolkien, who's like, I hate allegory, right? He's like, nothing here is allegorical. There's parallels, but it's not allegorical. Then you have Pullman, who is like, this is the Catholic Church, period. Like, full stop. Like, that's my intent. It's what I'm going for. And I find it funny that, like, you can look at Pullman, and I extrapolate further from even his explicit intent, because what a piece of art does will inherently live on its own and evolve with times and go beyond what the author crafted. I mean, that's the part of the creation process you can't actually nail down. It's, the way someone interprets a piece written by Octavia Butler back when she was writing books is going to hit differently now, because instead of her being predictive, now it's almost prophesied. And so it's like, oh, this is hitting different. And so it's going to have all these different impacts. And that's one of the most fascinating parts of the creative process to me, is how art genuinely has its own life. And as soon as it leaves an author's hands, their intent to me is like when you shoot a rocket. It's like the initial trajectory, but all of a sudden the navigation breaks. And so after you send it off, it's going to go live its own life. And it can be co-opted by people. It can be misconstrued. It can be, maliciously. We've seen pieces of art throughout history be like adapted. Even on a symbol level. I mean, the swastika's original intent versus how it's used as this hate symbol now is a great example of that. And so I generally across all spectrum of art and creativity, there's this other thing that must be respected, which is how history will look back on things. And that's kind of this whole meta conversation that you can spend whole college courses discussing. But it's that to me is something I want to do more content on in the future, because there's I'm talking too much right now, but there's a book called The Master and Margarita, which was written during Stalin's reign, I believe. And it's very like, if the author had been caught writing this, he would have been murdered. And it's come out, and it's this, really interesting religious piece that has so many layers to it. And I just always have thought, what it would be like to sit in that author's shoes, being such a driven, creative person that you write this thing that you know would get you killed. But it's a piece of fiction, you're just like, I have to write this. Like, that, to me, is like such a pure form of like I don't know, it's a good book, but I don't like necessarily agree with everything the book says or everything it doesn't say.
Right.
But I just, that level of artistry of being like, I have to write this, no matter what, is so something the next level I do not understand and respect.
So when you say all that, you're saying to some degree you don't feel as strongly about the stuff that you're writing?
I mean, I'm coming into this book with the intent of writing what I'm writing. But in terms of like, do I think it's as important as, these pieces? No, of course not. I'm just some YouTuber who's attempting to write his first fantasy book. I think my book's going to be a flash in the pan. Hopefully it has some legs beyond the initial reaction. That's going to be the quality of the book. Once it's in people's hands, that'll be judged. But I think in terms of like the Tolkien who's just like, there's no allegory, take it from here, to the Pullman, I kind of try to fall in the middle where I very fairly am saying like, I'm clearly pulling from things that are in the real world, and that's fine to draw those parallels, but I'm not trying to do something with it beyond just like, I'm pulling from examples of real world police abuse. I'm pulling from real world examples of cultural extinguishing that happened with Imperial Britain, where they tried to just say like, this culture does not matter. When you put something in a museum like they did, or you co-opt it, you're essentially saying it's a relic. It's not something that's relevant now. It's something for us to look at. It's a piece of academia. It's not something that actually exists and matters to these people still, which is not true. It's an evil thing to do. I wanted to write a sci-fi story actually that was about like aliens coming down and just being like, the Washington Monument's neat, we're gonna take that, and we're like, no, that's important to us, and they're like, no, it's gonna be in a museum, don't worry, we're gonna keep safe care of it.
That sounds like how the museum in Doctor Who got started.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Oh man, I was about to ask something. So about the themes in your own book. So are you saying that although there are themes that you're touching upon, you're not necessarily trying to make a stance necessarily about whether it's good or bad, or whether that's like, you're not putting too much of your own beliefs, or would you say you are putting a decent amount?
I'm putting my own beliefs in the sense that, like, yeah, I think overpowered police are a really bad thing in society. And so we're in this first book getting the perspective of the cops, and the second book's going to be more of a shift towards the people. And then the third book, mild spoilers, going to be more of like the people actively working against this government's perspective. And I wanted to really give the propagandized viewpoint first, and that way when you have this parallel, this comparison in the third book, it's really apparent once you go back and look at the first, like where the disconnects are happening in these people's brains. Because I've found it to be very true throughout my life. Like it's actually very easy to just go with the flow of what society is like, no, this is fine. And then you go and you see what the people who are having to actually deal with the consequences of the problems caused by over here, and they will give you the real truth. I mean, that's something that, drawing a parallel, is something that's clearly happening with Black Lives Matter. I had conversations with my dad where he was explicitly saying, like, I had no idea this was a problem, and now knowing it was a problem that's so much worse when I was growing up, and it just never affected me, so I had no idea. Like, he was like, wow, I feel this, like, horrible feeling now. Because he was, just never opened his eyes to it. And so those kinds of things, absolutely, I'm drawing inspiration from. And in the third book, when we're dealing with rebels and the people who are from cultures that are being put down by this empire, it's going to be a whole different light. People are saying this first book's dark and it's horror. This is the lightest it's going to get, because this is from the people who have the sunshine glasses over their eyes to like prevent them from seeing the darkness that's there. So I'm sorry if this book's too dark for some. It gets worse.
I just think it's hilarious that you even try to claim it's not horror. Like, I get where you're coming from in that it's not intentionally wanting to be subcategorized as horror, but I think with the amount of horror elements in it, it would be wrong to neglect that it is a horror story to some
My
degree.
counter is, in the modern sense of horror, the way with the modern horror genre has become, I don't think it is, because it's not like jump scares and things like that I think most people associate with horror now. What I truly love as horror, I agree with, is in my book, but I think modern audiences more consider that thriller. Like the movie Seven to
okay,
me
that's
is
fair.
certainly horrific, but I would label it thriller by modern standards. And so that's where I would.
Which, by the way, I just rewatched that movie like a couple weeks
It's so
ago.
good.
I forgot about the ending. I think I like shut it out of my mind. And when I'm watching the ending, I was like, oh my God. How did I forget this? I think I got so traumatized the first time I watched it that I just forgot.
And it's Brad Pitt and his most attractive. I know people point to Fight Club, but something about Brad Pitt in that movie, like his cocky doofus mentality, I'm just like, why is this doing things for me?
Speaking of like the sort of personalities of your characters, you knew I was going to bring this in at some point eventually. How did you come up with the personalities for your characters? Do you feel it's just like a more natural, you just try to make them be themselves, or how in depth do you get with your character personality development?
So developing personalities of individual characters is something that I think the more work you do early on, the more benefits you have as you work. So it's something you really need to build behind the scenes. I totally embrace Evan Winter's mentality of, when it comes to character, of just plan. So that way when you get to the actual writing, it just flows out of you. So for the main character, Hlid, she was very much so inspired by a lot of really strong women from my own life that have been very inspirational to me, as well as just, I'm a big MMA fan, and men, women, MMA, I love it, and just seeing like Amanda Nunes wreck some shit, I was like, okay, I want some of that in Hlid, because I feel like it fits her well. She is a woman who will beat ass if she needs to.
She definitely thinks that way.
But like her love for her husband, her drive in her job, and the arc she goes through in this book, I really wanted to be where the spotlight's at, because I wanted it to be someone who I found, when you realize like you've been fed lies, like I've definitely woken up to some truths in my life, and I found that you often don't even consciously realize you've changed your mind on something until you have like a second, like there's you changed your mind, but then you make a decision, and it's that decision that makes you realize, I just woke the fuck up. And there's a very clear moment with her in this book where she's like, oh, whoa, okay, I'm awake here. And that's something I really wanted to bring in, and she just seemed like the very natural vessel to have that. There's elements of my own mom in there. There's elements of like, just like politicians I've enjoyed, and there's also like Deborah Morgan from Dexter. Like it's just a pot. As well as a couple things from just friends I have, and actually a male friend of mine who, how he kind of treats his significant other. I just really like how tender he is, and that kind of came into her relationship with her husband. Samuel's the least developed, honestly. He's just husband character in some ways. And I like his... he is supposed to be kind of not intentionally a blank slate, but to feel like a very neutral for the society. He's someone who's very bought into it. He's very just comfortable living the life he lives, and so he's going to just be more... His absolute loyalty is to his wife, but he's definitely a neutral tone. And then you have Chapman. And Chapman is my chaos factor, because he's too smart to be propagandized forever. There's two kinds of people who are that level of intelligent for me. There's people who will realize that they're that smart, and they'll realize that the society they're in is wrong, and they'll push against it. And then there's people who will realize the society they're in is right or wrong, and then they will decide to manipulate it and use that to enhance themselves. The first early drafts, Chapman was the latter. He was actually someone who was going to be more on the evil side of things, but with the narrative, it kind of became more actually middle ground. He's very self-serving in a way, and I'll let readers figure out what I mean by that. But I found that his actual character, his biggest driver, is truth as well. He kind of shares that with Hlid. It's actually why they're good friends. They don't like each other's personalities a whole lot. And there's no romantic element between them. Chapman's asexual. Hlid's attracted to him, but he's not really returning anything there aside from friendship. But he very much so shares an element of just wanting to know truth. And that's kind of, the only redeeming character within these cops who are bad people in what they do in their job, is that they are, at the end of the day, very driven to truth. And then there's the captain of the precinct, who, for me, I genuinely was just watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I was like, I want Captain Holt in my story, so I wrote Captain Holt in my story.
I don't.
He's a very intelligent, very good man who who is wholesome and a giant teddy bear, and I just wanted that to be the captain, so I kind of just wrote that in there. But I never wanted to forget that they're part of a system that's doing horrible things. So you'll see them being people, because that's something you need to remember in the real context of history. If you walked around, some of the most evil times in history, like America during Manifest Destiny, where massacring natives, if you met your average person, they would still be, oh, hey, how's it going? Like, they would still, let's go get a drink. But then they're going to go do something awful because they just believe it. They've been fed lies. They think it's okay. And that's why there's going to be some pretty jarring moments in this book where it's like, oh, Halid seems kind of, oh my God.
Yeah, there were some moments where I was like, oh no, lady, don't do this. Don't do this. Please.
Murder is very accepted from these cops, and that's not all right.
Yeah, and it also seems like there's like a very weird relationship between the cops and the people, like especially that scene. I don't know how much we can say, but it's between Clyd and Chapman, and they're in a bar. That scene and the way that people react to them is very interesting. I like how you fit that in. Is that something we're going to get to see more of, is like how the people interact with the cops?
That scene's actually going to be basically the theming inspiration for book 2, because...
Oh, nice. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, what kind of things do you do to help yourself see other people, especially in different situations from you? Because you did mention that you feel like you've had a more privileged life. So what do you do to help expand your understanding of the world?
Well, the first big eye-opening I had growing up was my mom came out as gay, and when you're very, very close to someone who is in the LGBTQ plus community, you're going to start seeing how they are treated different. And the stuff they go through, from neighbors doing very passive-aggressive things to telling my mom she's going to burn in hell. And so that was the first kind of like, there's something really wrong here. I was just an ignorant white kid growing up in the South who bought into the whole everything's hunky-dory, don't look into beyond what you've been taught in elementary school. I'll never forget the day my teacher told us that after we nuked Japan, Japan welcomed us in and wanted us to show them democracy. And I even at my young age, I was like,
they said that. Wow.
I'm calling bullshit. You remember like those old smart boards? I saw that they actually had an animation where a smiling Japan and a smiling America overlapped. And I was just like, God. We nuked them. That doesn't seem right.
We also captured and put their people in camps within our own country.
Yeah.
We were welcomed with open arms for sure. That seems accurate.
And then I went to, after my parents split and I got moved to a much more diverse northern school, I got to speak to people who are from all different walks of life, really got to actually be friends with people who did not just grow up in this bubble, and that was, again, very eye-opening. There's people in America who fear for their lives every day, and that's something you don't get when you're raised in a bubble. I mean, you can hear about it, but you don't really understand it until you see the fear in a friend's eyes when a cop's pulling him over, and you're thinking like, it's just a cop, but then you realize like, oh, to him it's not just a cop. And that stuff was definitely formative for me. And then obviously the movement that's going on still now, it's not over. The Black Lives Matter movement helped open my eyes more. But I don't want to say like any of that is supposed to be a direct allegory within my book, because honestly, from my position, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. Like, it's not supposed to be. I just was inspired by a lot of what I see, especially, I'm a huge history nerd. Imperialism, Manifest Destiny, the empire building that went on for thousands of years was so evil, and so many awful things were done. I just kind of pull from the broad spectrum of what I've seen from how power corrupts, power puts people into being awful. That's what I'm kind of pulling from, this broader part of humanity that I think has been with us since our birth of civilization, that people in positions of power tend to somehow be drawn to abuse, to oppressing others, and it's a very difficult thing. I mean, we in our own country definitely had some eye-opening recently where we felt very secure in our democracy, and now, however you view what happened in these last few months, there's definitely less a feeling of security now. And I was very inspired by that, actually, some in some later revisions of like, positions of power, seats of power are never stable as people think. They can always be rattled. So that's another place I drew from.
So it would be hard to ignore that, to a certain degree, it could be said that you have quite a bit of power, having over 250,000 subscribers. Yep. This is a two-part question. First of all, do you still stand by that video you made, where you made a video that was like, why you shouldn't make a YouTube channel when you had like 20K or something, or 30K? Do you still stand by that? And two,
I don't even remember the video, so I can't say whether I do or not. I've been at this for 5 years now. There's a lot that I don't know what I said, sure.
You went on like a 10 to 15 minute rant about why people shouldn't start a YouTube channel, basically.
I probably don't. I mean, I was definitely struggling with some harsh anxiety and bad reactions to some things that were said to me at various stages of being a YouTuber. I have much thicker skin now, but I would probably say no. I think starting a YouTube channel is a really great thing. I mean, especially, especially if you don't have the mentality of, I need to make 100K subs. If you're just doing it for fun, have fun. That's awesome. Totally support that. And you need to get ready for some weird comments, especially if, you're going to be talking about fandoms that people are really passionate about. There are people out there who make their entire identity one franchise, and you need to get ready for those people's reactions to whatever you say. So, I think it's really cool. It's really fun. I think it's kind of a modern day gold rush in some ways. If you're able to strike gold and blow up, awesome. But it's also definitely a grind. And if you start making it more and more a bigger part of your life, you need to be careful about how much of your life you let it consume.
There are plenty of people who want to have that many subscribers, and there's a lot of positive reinforcement you get from that. There's a lot of negative reinforcement from that, but still somehow it seems like you're keeping pretty level-headed through it all. So what do you think are your key contributing factors that allow you to stay level about it all?
Well, first, I don't know if I've kept a perfectly level head, and I rely on people around me who I trust a lot, who have been friends with me since before all this started, to keep me in check. I mean, I have friends who will be brutally honest with me, and my own father is extremely honest with me about this stuff. I mean, he has told me, like, I'm making sure you keep your head on your shoulders, and he will tell me, hey, that's bad, that's crappy, that's a horrible take. And so that's something, I cherish. The people who I've kept closest to me are absolutely not yes men. And I think some people see a sub count of what I have and they think too much of it. I'm not making godly amounts of money. I don't have crazy amounts of power. I'm still very reachable. You can tweet at me and I will see it. So it's not as insane as a lot of people think. I'm not sitting on a Jake Paul throne, thank God. With that level of delusion.
What, you don't want to start a pyramid scheme?
No, and I also don't want to box people. But,
Come on, okay, real question though. If you and Luke Edwards had to go in a boxing match, who do you think would win?
Luke seems like a really nice guy, and I'm a huge pacifist. I don't believe in that. I'm a fan of watching boxing and stuff, but I would never hit someone. So if he wanted to hit me, fine, but I'd try to hug it out with him.
So it would turn into more of a wrestling match, is what you're saying?
I think it'd turn to a hug fest.
And then it might turn into a little bit more than that.
But no, I mean, it's important because here's what I will say. I don't know how humble I've kept. I don't know how much this has affected my anxiety or how much I'd be feeling the anxiety I feel if I didn't have this job. But what any success, even at like 10K subs or 50 or whatever on YouTube, it's going to heighten your emotions really and violently. Like, you're going to have days where you feel like, awesome, I've accomplished something great, I love this, you're going to be so thrilled. And then you're going to have days where you absolutely hate everything you've done. You hate yourself because someone said something that definitely drove and hit a nerve, and it's going to just make you feel very unstable. And that's what this kind of success provides, highs and lows. My average every day, talking to my therapist, getting into it and having a shrink, I think it's probably been overall a bit of a negative to my mental health. To my, happiness in other ways, it's been positive. It's definitely made me feel more secure and confident in certain aspects. It's given me access career-wise to stuff I, never thought possible. I've talked to many of my favorite authors. Oh my God. But living a life where on a daily you can get an email from someone saying, you got me back into reading. I love this. I owe you so much. And then the next email is a weird sexual fanfic of you that's very uncomfortable and like just is odd. Like it's going to affect you, of course, on a psychological level. Like that stuff is going to get in there. It's just about trying as hard as you can to really realize who you are and that you're just someone who gets up every morning, has a morning toozy, and you're not special. You're just in a position where some people might feel that way about you. What I could tell to those people is, I'm just a guy. I'm just a Bill on Capitol Hill.
Okay.
And what I found most this is getting really real. What I found most frustrating and interesting is when you hit a level, people stop when to have a conversation with you. They want to yell at you. Whether it's positive or negative, they just want to throw something at you. And my God, I would rather have a dialogue. I'd so much rather have a dialogue. Granted, because a lot of people are yelling at me, I can't have one with everybody. But I try every now and then to pick someone out and be like, okay, you're saying something I haven't heard before, whether it's positive or negative, like let's have a minute. And there's also a balance of you need to make sure that, you know, you're talking to this person and they are not trying to get at some ulterior weird thing. I've definitely, you know, been exchanging a couple messages with someone back and forth, and suddenly there's a penis in my inbox, and I'm like, and block. Like, it's a frustrating, weird thing, and there's a lot of research being done about what these dynamics are now, because celebrity is so accessible. It's strange, and I have a really small sliver of it. Like, I am somewhat known in a certain circle of a kind of fandom on the internet, and I'm already dealing with all this.
Right.
I cannot imagine what someone like on a Rihanna level faces on the daily. Like, can't comprehend.
Right.
Like, that is so crazy what they have to probably deal with before 9 a.m. on a Tuesday.
So I would imagine then when you have people who are from, like, they're all different perspectives, and like you mentioned, some of these chats start off normal and then they get real weird real fast. How has it affected like friendships in your life? Because you obviously have like some friends, but you've probably met people off the internet, like Murphy, you obviously met off the internet. Mm-hmm. How has having a YouTube channel affected your ability to make friends, and also does it change how you view people when they message you and stuff like that?
It definitely changes how I view people. It also soured me in many ways to speaking with people from my past who like randomly reach out. Like I have to really trust you as a person from someone to past, because I've had a lot of people from the past just reach out and are like, "Oh, I saw your channel. Can you help me with XYZ?" And it's just like, "No, dude, we haven't talked in 6 years. Why are you reaching? Go away." And it's that kind of sucks. And there's some people I'm good enough friends with that if they do that, it's like, sure, I'll help you because I love you. We got shared memories. But you become more hesitant. It's strange. I mean, I had brunch with people today. The brunch ended with them saying like, "Hey, also our friend would really love to talk to you about this thing." And it felt sincere, so it was fine. But it's just a thing you need to be aware of, that when you have a platform, most of your social like engagements, people are going to have some part of their brain where they're thinking like, "Oh, he could do this for me. That'd be great." And it definitely gets odd, and it's why when I find someone who I don't feel any of that with, I very much so appreciate it. Usually it's people with other platforms, and that's actually why I think you start seeing content creators hang out with other content creators a lot, because there's just none of that. There's none of that like, you can help, no, because we're all in this hustle. We're all on this grind. No one's trying to start or come in with a different angle. It's just kind of a natural fit. And that's why I've kept the friends I've had since college around, since before all this happened, because they don't give a crap. They make fun of me. They're like, "You put out a book? That's adorable." Like, "Oh, it's not even a real book, it's a novella." They give me that, which I need, that's important.
Yeah. No, I think friends who keep it real and are honest with you is the only way to maintain personal growth as a human being. Because if you have no one telling you that you're an idiot, you're never going to recognize your own idiocy until it hurts you and you have it publicly strewn across the internet.
Yeah.
And there was no one to tell you no, and then you get canceled 10 years later.
Well, I mean, there's nothing, everyone when they were a kid said dumb stuff, laughed at crap. I'm very much so about getting over that. One of the things, I am pro, like, certain people get caught doing awful stuff. Yeah, they don't support them anymore. Like, I don't support certain celebrities like Chris Brown. He can go fuck himself. He's an awful person. I don't think he's changed at all. But, like, there's also stuff where you need to be open for growth and not knowing and changing their minds. I mean, I find it a really beautiful thing when I'm able to, over the course of talking with someone, make them kind of let go of all of or part of their homophobia or something. Just let them, hey, these are people. Like, they're not making a decision. It's not a choice. It's who they are. They're very true to themselves. And, that's something I think we need to be okay with. You need to be okay with helping people grow. I draw the line if people are actively hurting others. If someone's hurting someone, no, there's no conversation there. You stop. But if people's beliefs are not aligning right and they are carrying hatred, the way to cure hatred is through patience. I've found a lot of patience and a lot of questions. Not spilling your own stuff, but questioning them, making them question their own beliefs is where you have to come from.
I would agree wholeheartedly that questioning is probably the best way to understand what someone believes, because if you don't understand what they believe, there's this quote that my friend Michael says, and it's like, oh gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Whoever is in charge of the definition is in charge of the debate,
Yeah.
or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote, but essentially the meaning being whoever hasn't defined exactly what they're talking about, they're the ones that have superiority in the conversation because there's withheld information. And someone who's approaching you in some kind of argument is always going to have that superiority until you start questioning their exact definitions. Because you could start an entire argument all based off you both interpreting one word differently and causing this whole argument that didn't even need to be there. It's just you guys would have chosen different words to say the exact same thing, and you might even be on the same page as someone and just not even know it because your words aren't coming out very well.
Yeah, I mean, oh man, there's so many times where I've put my foot in my mouth and just come across horribly. And it's like, oh yeah, I meant what I said, but not in the way that it was. Oh no. There's a, words. It's people think communication is an exact science. It's absolutely not. Communication is a very difficult thing that I have been preaching for a long time. We need to have rhetoric in school. We need to have, like, from elementary to middle to high school. You need to be teaching kids how to properly debate, how to properly check facts, cite sources. That needs to be, especially in the disinformation age we're in now, it's unbelievably important. If you want to solve, I thoroughly believe, a third of the world's problems, increase everyone's communication skills. It'll get way more civil really fast.
That is a future I dream towards, where we can just openly discuss things, because I think disagreements are fundamentally good, because there's always going to be a problem with whatever idea you bring to the table. Like, say you're like, I want to solve world hunger. Here's my solution. Well, your solution is going to have issues no matter how, like, ideal the outcome is, and so you need to be able to discuss with other people who have completely opposing views, because there are aspects of their views which are 100% validated, and until you can address that, you can't have forward movement with that.
Yeah.
So.
And the only time I draw a line is when people come in with bad faith arguments. I mean, if people are coming in just to try and gaslight you and, not even putting forward things they believe in, they're just trying, like, those people exist, right? Trolls are a thing. That's where you have to just walk away and be like, all right, this is a miserable person who's just trying to spread misery. Yeah.
Do you delete comments?
I've banned certain words, like a bunch of racial slurs and stuff in my channel, but I don't think I've deleted a comment off my channel in multiple years, probably. And there's certainly people who are banned that come in. Basically the people who made me realize I need to add another racial slur to the filter, those people have been banned.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Or homophobic slur.
That's
or
unfortunate.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. I've noticed that the larger a group gets, the more rules you have, because there's always one person who takes whatever the rule is and just tries to take it to the furthest extreme possible, such as that, oh, I can't say this word, well, what about this word that's almost the same thing but not quite exactly the same thing? Then you have to, like, make all these rules to make sure people behave and whatnot. But
yeah.
I guess it's already been almost an hour, so we should probably wrap the conversation up. Do you have any advice for somebody who is wanting to either write and or start a channel, or more specifically someone who's doing both?
Start. I mean, it's something I've been saying for a long time. You can come up with 1,000 reasons why you shouldn't start right now, but those are always going to be there, so just do it. You don't need the best equipment. I started recording on a webcam with no mic. Just start. And once you start making those baby steps, it's amazing what the avalanche effect will do.
Awesomely said. Everyone, if you want to find Daniel's channel, just go ahead and click the link down below. It'll be there. Most of you guys probably already subbed, except people who don't read, in which case I hope you still enjoyed this conversation. Do you have any final words for anyone?
Thanks for having me on. I love you and I love your audience. Thank you.
Thanks.